Shall I say? Shall I start? Yes.
I just say a few words. And also, meine Damen und Herren, ich freue mich, dass alle da sind. Leider sind nicht alle die da, die angemeldet sind. Das sage ich nur mal vorneweg. Ich bitte deshalb, dass wir hier so ein bisschen zusammenrücken. Sonst sieht das aus wie bei Louis Trenker. Und jeder hat die Begrüßungsrede bekommen, kann die in Ruhe durchlesen. Dies ist Professor Dr. Niels Harrit, der vor 40 Jahren in Bonn studiert hat und deshalb lieber Englisch.
Kann er ja gut Deutsch.
Aber es sind genügend Leute da, die aufpassen. Wenn jemand was nicht versteht, muss er nur die Hand heben, dann kriegt er gleich die richtige Antwort. Und mehr brauche ich nicht sagen.
Ja, guten Nachmittag. Ich komme aus Kopenhagen und ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, aber es reicht leider nicht, einen ganzen Vortrag zu halten. So, in einem Moment werde ich in Englisch umschalten. Leider. But as an introduction, I wish to say that you're welcome to come up with questions during my presentation. I would prefer to do this without the microphone. I hope it's okay.
Yes.
And but point two, your questions must relate to whatever is going on up here. And I will be dealing with facts and observations and realities. So therefore, it is not permitted to forward any political statements. We are not discussing politics today. We're discussing realities. And here we see two very real objects as they presented themselves to the rest of the world prior to September 11, 2001. The Twin Towers, ladies and gentlemen, standing on the south of Manhattan, and enough is fine. Thank you. And this photograph was taken, the photographer was looking towards the east. So he has the west in his back, to the right is south, to the left is north. So this is the North Tower, which was finished in 1907 and stood there in a height of 470 meters, 110 stories, and on top of that came a TV antenna, another 100 meters. The South Tower was finished in 1973, just as tall, 470 meters, 110 stories. Now, how much did such a tower weigh? How heavy was the towers? Well, this can be discussed actually. The lowest estimate I have seen is 250,000 tons. And if you add to that the people, the elevators, all the cables, the computers, the furniture, the coffee machines, whatever, let's say 350,000 tons for such a tower. It is not important. What counts is that 90,000 of all these tons were steel. And we'll talk very much about this later on. Because the towers were constructed, they had a core with 47 columns and a perimeter with 236 columns. We'll return to this later. I just show this to you to give you an impression of the dimension of the steel structure. So this is a column, this is a worker, these are the perimeter columns. And so this was the situation prior to September 11th, 2001, where in the morning out in the streets there was a French TV crew following a young firefighter, a man who wanted to become firefighter. And they had done this for about a month. Nothing had happened. So maybe they were a little bored. But this morning to the station where he was working, there was an alarm of gas in one of the little streets in southern Manhattan. There was nothing else to do. So what you'll see here is the fire chief himself, the one with the cap, checking for gas.
It was 8:46 in the morning.
And then we heard a plane come over, and in Manhattan, you don't hear planes too often. I looked especially loud ones.
The time was 14 minutes to 9, and then 17 minutes passed by. I have been asked to use this. 17 minutes later, this thing happened. You will recognize that this was the North Tower, which was hit, the first, the one with the antenna. And guess what happens now? The South Tower was hit 17 minutes after the North Tower. And then 56 minutes went by.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
This was the South Tower, which went down after 56 minutes. I have the same event in another recording.
Appearing to fall away.
You can see it
from
from
the
the
rest
top.
of the building. Go to the tape now. Here we go, right here. This is, I mean, when you look at it, the building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
Let's go to Bob Bazell, who was at St. Vincent's Hospital. Bob.
Roughly half an hour later, this thing happened to the North Tower. Again, I have the same event in another recording, this time taken from New Jersey, the other side of the Hudson River, on a distance, so we can see how enormous these towers were. But this is not what we are going to talk about, not for the first part of my presentation. I forgot to tell you that my presentation comes in two parts, and there'll be an intermission, and we'll eventually clock into about 2 hours total. The first part will be about 1 hour. But we're not going to talk about this the first hour. There was a question here in the front.
Yeah, that footage that we just saw, I've seen for the first time. When the tower, the exterior of the tower collapses, is that the interior column that we see left standing, which then collapses thereafter? That's what it looks like.
The spikes. Yeah, the last video.
Yeah.
You saw the spikes falling. Yeah, there were a few columns left actually when we went down.
But the center column was still standing.
There were 47 center columns.
Yeah, thanks. I apologize.
Three of them about that.
Okay, yeah, because I haven't seen that before.
Okay, but please recognize how they went down, because they did like this.
Yes.
They did not do like that.
Correct.
And that is a very important point. Because World Trade Center was a center. Until 4 years ago, I thought the World Trade Center was the two towers, the Twin Towers. I didn't realize that there were 7 buildings in World Trade Center. The North Tower had number 1, the South Tower had number 2, number 3, the Marriott Hotel, 22 stories behind the 2 towers. Number 4, number 5, and number 6 were all relatively low buildings, but World Trade Center 7 over here was a huge building, at least up for Danish standards. This is a photograph of the same area. We have number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. World Trade Center 7 was lying on the other side of a little street here called Beweise Street. It was a younger building than the towers. It was finished in 1987 and stood there about a little less than half the height of the towers, 186 meters, 47 floors, which is 3 times, very much higher than any building in Denmark. I don't know about Germany. And the distance from the North Tower was about 110 meters. And what we see here, and the footprint was just a little less than a soccer field. So it was a gigantic building. This picture of Building 7 was taken at a time when you see the North Tower had been hit, the South Tower had not been hit yet, and we see the north facade of Building 7 presents itself as a modern office building. Now, who were the tenants in World Trade Center 7? Of course, there were some commercial institutions. The only one worth mentioning is the Salomon, Smith & Barney, because they occupied the other 20 stories of the building, and sometimes, in BBC, for instance, it's called the Salomon Building. More interesting is the federal agencies. Pentagon had offices in the building, so had the tax service. CIA had their New York undercover secret headquarters in the building. It was not revealed before a few days afterwards in New York Times. The Secret Service had their biggest office outside of Washington, D.C. And Secret Service is a very important institution in the American power structure because they take over the power if the president or the vice president are not available in a situation of emergency. So they also decide where the president is supposed to be. They can tell him to leave, and then he has to leave because they take care of security as well, and a lot of other things. Now, this is interesting, eventually, the Security and Exchange Commission, because this is an institution which takes care of everything about corruption and fraud in the American corporate life in the companies. And at that time, they had between 3,000 and 4,000 unsolved cases in their offices. Among them, most of the Enron scandal, which many people have heard about, and all of the so-called WorldCom scandal from California, where many, many people lost their pension. And on the 23rd floor, there also was an Office of Emergency Management, which we do not have time to go further into. It's very interesting as well. Now we go 7 hours further into the afternoon of September 11th. And take a look at what happened to World Trade Center 7.
What's the reason?
That was my computer. It was not how the building really behaved. I'm sorry. You'll see this many times again. I hope it behaves a little better later on. It shouldn't do that. This was how Building 7 came down, and I have the same the same event. Also 2 other recordings. This taken at a distance down the street called West Broadway Street, where you can see how tall the building was. There's no sound in this clip. The next one is taken long distance from Midtown Manhattan, where you have a better view of how the whole structure, the symmetry of the structure, and how it went down. And for those who listen very carefully to the soundtrack, it is not very loud. You will hear the voice of Dan Rather, who was for 40 years the main news anchor of CBS Netflix.
And again, what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Now we're going to videotape the collapse of this building. It's amazing.
Right.
Amazing, incredible picture word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before. A building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. And
so the building fell down into a neat little tidy pile. We saw here about 20 meters high, 2 stories high, and there were almost no damage done to the buildings surrounding them. The facade here is absolutely untouched. Maybe a chunk was beaten off this corner here. The same area, this time photographed from the south. We see there was a little damage here, but otherwise the fronts of these buildings were untouched. And what remains is only the steel frame, which we'll return very much to. Everything else is gone. All the concrete was pulverized, all the gypsum, the wallboards were pulverized. Everything was gone. What is left is only the steel frame. What's the question?
Which tower was that?
This is 7.
Oh, the 7.
Yeah. We only talk about 7 for the next hours. Okay. And you see here the how the steel is, well, just a picture to put into perspective the fact this thing came down into its own footprint. This picture was taken when everything was still okay. It's a car down here. It's a pretty long, it's almost 200 meters. This gigantic thing falls down into its own footprint. And we call this an implosion. What you see here is the outer panels kind of folded into the center thing of it. And we all know what an explosion is. When the pressure in a container is too high and goes in all directions. Imagine that you would suck out all the air of, say, a soda can, and it would go, it would collapse into itself. This is what we call an implosion. And this is how you would characterize this collapse, that the inner part of the building went down first, and then the outer panels kind of folded right on top of that, very neatly. Let's repeat and hope for yeah, it went down just like that. I wonder how many of you have seen this before. But very few people are actually aware that there was this 3rd building and that it came down like this. You'll notice that it went down very fast, but the question is, how fast actually did it go down? But there's an American physicist called David Chandler who had taken the effort to make some, it's not that difficult, very accurate calculations using a program called Tracker, where you can take a video, you can fix a point on the object here, and you can ask the program to follow it all the way down. And since you have 25 frames per second in the video, you also have a clock. So you very accurately can measure the time. And what he did here, all the points all the way down. Then you put it into the program. You ask the program to calculate the velocity, the speed of decay. And this is what you see here. Velocity means speed. And you see that at some point here, suddenly the building goes down. And the distance, the velocity here has negative values. It is simply a matter of mathematics because the building is going downwards, so that's why it's negative values. So the speed downwards is increasing. It's getting more and more negative. It's increasing. And you'll notice that all these points are lying on a straight line, meaning that the speed, the velocity, is increasing constantly for at least 2.5 seconds. Now what does that mean, that the speed is increasing constantly? I asked an old guy, and his name is Sir Isaac Newton, and he does know this stuff. He came out with a book in 1687, which tells us the most important book in science, which deals with how things move. And I told him also, you'll notice here that we came out with a slope here of 9.88, and the unit is meters per second square. But so this is the slope, this is the acceleration, Beschleunigung in German. And so what does it mean? He said this means that you have a constant acceleration. Everybody driving a car knows what this is. And we said, well, we have measured an acceleration of 9.88 meters per second. And he said, this is free fall. Now, what is free fall? Free fall means that something is falling freely. This should be taken literally. It's falling free. I'll show you in a second. And he also provided me with a formula saying that the height from which the thing is falling freely is equal to half g is a constant, actually, the acceleration. This is 9.88, and the time squared. And then it's very easy to make a little calculation and find out that it takes about 1.66 seconds for an object to fall freely. And I will make a little demonstration now using my hairbrush, if I can find it here. Okay? I'll hold my hairbrush in a height of 2 meters. I'll count to 4, and I will release it at 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. It fell, and it hit the ground. If you had been fast enough with a stopwatch, it would have hit the ground in 0.66 seconds. This is what happened to the 47th floor of Building 7. It fell as if there was nothing below it. It means that at that time, all the supporting structure of this building was eliminated. And if some idiot had been standing on the 47th floor, holding a stone or an apple or a cannonball out the window and released the stone at the same time that he or she began moving, the stone would have followed the top floor all the way down. I have a little video demonstrating this. This is free fall here.
The ball had started to drop, yet 7 World Trade is still above the starting line. At the 1 second mark, 7 World Trade and the ball are still even. Seven World Trade indeed falls 100 meters in 4.5 seconds.
Now, what have we seen? Now it becomes science. We're doing observations. We saw Building 7 starting very suddenly. It's called sudden onset in English. And the whole building went down suddenly. We saw that for at least 2.5 seconds it fell freely, in free fall. We saw the whole building going down, completely symmetrical, and we saw that it went all the way down. And if you have problems with mathematics, many people do, you can, I'm sure, count to 3. And that we have to realize and remind ourselves that Building 7 was not hit by an airliner. There were 2 airliners, but there were 3 skyscrapers. So something doesn't fit here. Now, if we, please.
We just saw an acceleration of 9.88 meters per square second.
Yes.
As far as I remember from school, the acceleration in free fall is 9.81 meters. That means it was quicker than a free fall.
Well, you may say so. But for once, And it's true, and it's shifted from different geographical locations. But it's true, for New York City, it's also less than 980. But we are talking about, make a quick calculation, we are within 1%. The error is less than 1%.
Good, but a difference downwards should be impossible. If it would take a bit longer, that would be possible.
But this is the insecurity of the measurement. It is within 1%. I think it's fine where you're taking 10 points down the line. It's a little fast.
It's remarkable.
Yeah, and it could be. There has been speculations about this, and people has been speculating that maybe, for reasons which will be understood later, there was vacuum in the building. So it's actually not just falling, we're talking about less than 1%. Please be a little generous. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
please. Was that result from where you put the first ball with this tracker program? I mean, if it's exactly not congruent with the rules, or it was a little off, that could
easily give 1%.
Yeah, I mean that's what we're talking about, because I mean, how exactly can you be looking at a film and putting a dot on it, and you can't absolutely 100% accurate.
I'm not really sorry to interrupt you, but you could see it obviously in the presentation. Yeah. The stone was slower than the building.
Yeah.
Even in the presentation it was obvious.
Okay.
Yeah.
The building went quicker down than it could.
Yeah. That's also true.
But I think there's no doubt that it went down.
The terrible truth here is that the film is older than the mission, unfortunately. Okay, if we have to find out why and how Building 7 went down, we have to take a look at the structure of the building. And it would follow the same design as that of the towers. In this case, there was 24 central, very strong columns, and 57 columns all the way around in the periphery. And these columns were connected horizontally, of course, with steel beams. So were the external columns. And the floors were now lying like bookshelves, but on the horizontal beams here and out here, and they were carrying absolutely nothing of the whole structure. The floors were just there to hold up whoever was working on these floors. I do not have a picture of Building 7 during construction, so we had to go back to the pictures I showed you in the start of the towers to get an impression of what's going on here. This you've seen before. These are the perimeter columns, and these are the core columns, which of course was a little less sturdy with 7 because it was only half the height. But what may be important is that this is the floor. So let's take a closer look about how they were made, the so-called composite floor, because they're both steel and concrete. You'll see a kind of network, very light steel network here underneath. And then there's a very thin steel plate lying on top of it. And on top of the steel, there's a concrete slab floor, a thickness between 10 and 18 centimeters, depending on whatever this floor was supposed to support. And the floors were standing on what they call seats out here, and what the view is fine. Okay, we're going back to 7 now. Take a closer look on the steel frame. This is what one of the facades look like, and it's like a mosquito net. They're connected horizontally and vertically. And what happened to a mosquito net if you punch a hole in it? Nothing. Well, the mosquitoes can fly in and out, but you keep the structure. And this is Building 7, where somebody has taken away all the windows, all the walls, and etc. What remains is only the steel frame. This is the steel structure which carries the whole thing. A gigantic, what the children are climbing up in the park. But this one is 186 meters high, so it's a kind of gigantic thing. This is basically what we have to address. Okay, so question. How could it happen that we could make these, that the thing could occur according to all these observations? Now, the first place where you would expect an answer to emerge would be the 9/11 Commission report, which came out in July 2004. And we see these 9 gentlemen and this woman smiling to the photographer. And they came out with a book, 740-something pages, as I recall, and which should, in principle, according to their own announcement, cover everything what happened on that day. They do not mention Building 7, except for a very short passage. They do not mention that Building 7 collapsed at all. Tom Keene was asked, why did you mention Building 7? And he said, well, we considered it to be not important. So we have to look somewhere else. And this will be into the work of an institution called the National Institute of Standards and Technology. From now on, we call it NIST. This is a semi-academic institution which takes care of everything regarding measurements and standardization in natural sciences and technology. It's very important. You have it here in Germany, it's called BAM, in Berlin, Bundes for Materialmessungen or something like that. I have several colleagues down there. And they take care of everything regarding standardization and measurements. Now NIST is even bigger than BRM because American technology is dominating and leading. There are between 5,000 and 6,000 scientists work there, and they have very high reputation until the Bush administration came along, because they are politically run. It's not a scientific institution. The leaders are appointed politically. Okay, and they got in August 2002 this enterprise. The Congress found $16 million, which is peanuts in this connection, and told them to investigate and report on how World Trade Center came down physically. The first thing they did was to take out Building 7 as a separate project. And they said they concentrated on the towers. It is not true. We know that they were working on 7 all the time. But the final report on the towers came out in 2005. I could entertain you about that for hours. I will not. While the report on Building 7 was postponed repeatedly. Every half year they said, well, it will come in a half year. And then when the half year went by, it will come in another half year. They kept on doing that until August, October. There was a preliminary version of the report came out in August, and the final report came out in October. And this is what we shall relate to. This is the official account of how Building 7 collapsed, and I'll spend the rest of my first hour here going through the official explanation. What NIST says. Two very important conclusions is what NIST presented to us. First, der strukturelle Beschädigung von WTC7 war minimal und nicht entscheidend. This is important, that physical damage to Building 7 was minimal and did not play a role, because many people have been speculated how much Building 7 had been damaged from the collapse of the North Tower. Now, here is the point. WTC 7 Zusammenbruch hauptsächlich wegen normalem Bürobrand. Building 7 came down due to ordinary office fires. And this is a daring preposition. I put some mark of expression after here, because it has never happened before or after in history that a steel frame high riser has collapsed due to fire. So NIST knew very well that they were trying to suggest something which has never happened before or after, actually. And let's take a look. Because there have been many fires. I'll just very quick run through a few examples. 1991, Philadelphia, very famous fires. It lasted for 18 hours, and the building remained standing. Another one, 1988, Los Angeles. It was burning very much. I have read the summary of the fire report myself. There were no damage to the main structural members. the building remained standing. More recently, in Qatar, in Doha, the Persian Gulf, this building is burning, ladies and gentlemen. Caracas, 2004, it was burning for 17 hours, and the building remained standing. Another thing which also is interesting, there was a very serious fire in the North Tower in 1975. We do not have pictures from it. They have disappeared somehow. We cannot get any pictures. But I can show you a copy of the article here in the New York Times, where it was actually burning quite seriously for 3 hours. And please notice that the South Tower went down after 56 minutes. So we know actually that the towers can take some. I'm sometimes also asked, has it ever happened that an airliner has run into a high-riser? Oh yes, indeed, a steel-framed high-riser, a very renowned high-riser, the Empire State Building. On the 28th of July 1945, this B-25 bomber, no bombs on board, but it slammed into the Empire State Building, and the fire was actually extinguished quite fast. It is the only successful containment of a fire in a high-rise ever. But they succeeded in quenching the fire very fast. And as you may know, all of you, Empire State Building is still there. Actually, everybody went on work a week later and proceeded. So a steel-framed high-riser can't take an impact on the airline. Now, what Niels says about Building 7 here is that der Zusammenbruch von W2C1 is the North Tower. 1. Zündende Brände auf mindestens 10 Stockwerken und brannten unkontrolliert auf den Stockwerken 7 bis 9 und 11 bis 13. I have put a macro expression because the reason why the fires were out of control is because nobody controlled them. There was no attempt to quench the fires. You'll see in a little while. But then they say, 13 Uhr gab es keinen sichtbaren Beweis, dass die kleinen frühen Brände auf den Stockwerken 19, 22, 29 und 30 immer noch brannten. That is, out of the 10 fires reported here, 4 of them had gone out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we only have to care about what happened on floor 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13. Let's take a look. You can go into the report and very accurately see what happened on these floors. You don't have to remember this, but just 2 things. First, you should notice that there is a very serious account. Another thing is that none of these fires started before 2 o'clock, which means that between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, there were no fires in the building at all. The only important thing, floor, which will be important later on, is the 12th floor here, where there was a fire observed 8 minutes after 2 to 2:30, and then it burned on and off until collapse time, 20 minutes past 7. Let's take a look at one of the fires. The first picture I show you here actually is one of the early fires which had gone out after 1 o'clock, or before 1 o'clock, I'm sorry. Because this is the only visual account of that anything was burning on the south side. This is the southwest corner here. And these numbers refers to the floors. So you can see here on the 29th floor, there's a fire going on here. There has been a fire here. On the 30th floors, it has been fire. They went out in here. They're still burning here. Eventually, it's also burning down here. But these, as I said, these are fires which had gone out for that very natural reason that an office fire only lasts for 20 minutes. Then either the fire has to go on to the next office or the whole thing dies. More interesting is what happens in the afternoon. This is the other side of the building, the east side actually. And we are around the 11th, 12th, 13th floor up here. This is a close-up of this area. and where you have the 11th floor and the 12th floor, you see the small numbers here refers to the numbering of the perimeter columns behind the facade. So this way you have a very accurate coordinate system. You can always refer to the column and the floor, and you know exactly where you are. The time is 2:30 in the afternoon. A little later, we're approaching 3 o'clock. This is the north facade of the building here, and there's something going on the 7th floor and on the 12th floor here. A few minutes later, the fire on the 12th floor has extended a little bit toward the west. So has the fire on the 7th floor emerged, also a little satellite fire down here. Again, the north side now, 15 minutes past 3, the fire on the 12th floor has moved a little bit further to the west, so has the fire on the 7th floor, but still it is not very impressive. About an hour later, we are back on the northeast corner here, which I showed you in the start. Now you can see the fires here on the 12th and the 13th floor have gone out. There's still something happening apparently here on the 8th floor. These fires are smoldering, they're coming with smoke. There's a gigantic smoke coming out of this window. Maybe he forgot his winter tires before leaving. Yes, please.
Is there an official explanation why the fire started initially?
No, what Niels says is it was the collapse of the North Tower which started the fires. But this happened at 10:30. And we do not know, and this here is many hours later, 6 hours later. So this is what Niels says, that it was the collapse of the North Tower which started this fire. But between 1 and 2 o'clock, there is a gap where there was no fires reported at all. At this point, many people ask me, well, now all this smoke we see here on the backside, where does it come from? Well, some of it is from Building 7. And nobody questions that there was something going on in there, a lot of smoke being made. And there was a wind on the day coming in here from the north side. And this is probably the black smoke here is coming out of Building 7. And we all know that when the fire is smoking, it is not burning very hot. But most of the smoke up here is from Building World Trade Center 5, which is was standing just behind Building 6. And this is what Building 5 looked like at that moment. And it is actually burning. So this is World Trade Center. It's not as tall, of course, as Building 7. It's still a steel frame. And do I have to add that World Trade Center 5 actually remained standing? So, yes, the question maybe.
In reference to the colleague's question about the cause of the fire in WTC 7, in particular, some authors have made reference to that building was actually built above a power station, and that there was fuel in that power station which fed the fire. And maybe I'm jumping the gun in the presentation.
No.
What does that mean?
The hypothesis here is that it has nothing to do with the power station, but it's perfectly true that there was no basement, there were no foundations, we must say. It was built on top of the power station. Does not
fuel from the power station was made.
No, that's not the. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because the fuel you're talking about is there was no fuel in the power station. It was a transformer. Okay. Two things here. First, about what does it mean that it was standing on top of the power station? It did not mean that it was that the foundation was not very strong. When they built Building 7, they actually the foundations were laid already in the 60s. But when they finally built it in the 80s, they decided to move it a little bit. So they put in what the Americans called caissons, or caissons. This is these pillars which goes all the way down to the bedrock. I don't know what you call it in German, but they put down 102 of these. So this of steel, going directly down to the bedrock, to the stone. Okay. So Building 7 was a giant, but it was not a giant. It was standing very firmly. Now, regarding the fuel, what the theory is referring to was all the emergency power supplies in the buildings, where you have a big diesel engine standing on standby, which is supposed to jumpstart if this power fails. And this has been a hypothesis which has been forwarded in the years between 2001 and 2008 when the report came out, that the fuel from this emergency power station should be pumped into the building. I can go into great detail about that. There was 7 of them. There were 7 tanks. Wait. No, there were 5 tanks. And 4 of these were actually below street level. And the 5th one was between the 2nd and the 3rd level. And all the tanks they found, actually the tanks in the ground, and 2 of them was full, completely full. But I could talk about this for 10 minutes and tell you why the theory doesn't hold. But NIST rules it out. So what NIST rules out that these diesel tanks play any role at all. They ruled it out themselves. So this is why I don't mention it, because I don't have to. There were no fires below the 7th floor. And all these tanks were, 4 of them was below ground floor, and the 5th of them was between the 2nd and the 3rd. And they played no role. The official version, it was ruled out. But it was a hypothesis which was in the air in the intermediate years. Yeah, I think I'd like to take questions like that, but of course it will hurt a little bit in the end. I'll go 5 minutes over time. Now, going back to building 7, here what we see is these pictures were taken just before collapse time. Some what you call digital cameras, they have a timestamp, so we know exactly this is moments actually. Fractions of moments before the building came out. This picture has been timed by NIST themselves out of the slope of the shadows here. They could take from this, an astronomer could tell exactly what time it is from the slope of the shadow here. Also something with when the light goes on. And this is minutes before the building comes down. I just can't see any fires anywhere. So that's so much about the fires. In the papers you can read, in the ordinary mainstream paper, that the building was an inferno of fire. This is not true. There were small, random fires in the building. Now, NIST made no attempt to hide actually what their enterprise, what they had to do. Because they say that the Herausforderung war herauszufinden, ob ein durch Feuer verursachte Versagen der Bodenstruktur in Dauerpräsentation passieren könnte, durch herkömmliche Feuer genährt von Büroeinrichtungen. That is, their problem was to find out if the structure could come down due to ordinary fires. They do not try to find out what really happened. Their job is to justify, to make probable that it did come down due to fires. Now, what I'm going to do now is to present to you the NIST collapse model, NIST's mechanism for how the building collapsed, okay? And it has to account for an observation which you have seen already. This is namely the frame in the 3rd video I showed you in the start, and there's a penthouse up here, a deck house, I don't know what you call it, which goes down first. And there's a kink here. It actually goes down before the rest of the building. And now we have a problem with north, east, west, and south, because all the videos we are seeing is from the north side. But the floor structures I showed you earlier is, then you have the south side down here. So this penthouse we're talking about is right above the column which has number 79. So NIST suggests that on the 12th floor there was a fire in an office which heated up the floor beams up here, which then expanded. When something gets hot, it expands, which pushed the connecting beam from 79 So 44 out here pushed it off its seats. As you can see here, when these beams are expanding, they're pushing this beam off its seats, and then it fell down. This one fell down on the 12th floor, taking a few floors with them on its way down. Like here, you see here on the 12th floor, this, the fire was here, so it was the 13th floor actually which fell down, and then column number 79 was derived of this lateral support. There was nothing holding it here to the side, so it starts bending, and it bends and it bends, and then number 79 came down. Then column number 80 and number 81 did not have any support to its side, so it started bending as well. And then 80 and 81 came down, and then the local collapse was spreading horizontally through the whole building.
In the speed of light, right?
At the speed of light. And the whole internal structure collapsed. And then, afterwards, the perimeter structure came down. Here is a little video. It's Niels' own visualization of their mechanism. You see here the 13th floor that come down. This is column number 79. Starts bending, it goes down, and then the 89. It's not longer than that. This is all we have. Niels is not, what they want us to believe is that somewhere here, this is the south side, please notice. So column 79 goes from that corner up here all the way through the building. Somewhere at the opposite side of the little red dot, here on the 12th floor, a fire was occurring in some office where there was a local collapse, which should make this whole structure go down like we observed. NIST is not doing experiments at all on building 7. They are only doing calculations, or they call it simulations. I call it animations, because what they're doing is they're building a mathematical model of the whole structure. And then they're asking the computer, what happens to the building when you say pull out this element? And this is a decent way of actually doing research if you want to simulate some observations you're making. Actually, I have 3 students doing this at this very moment at DESI in the other end of town. But when you do that, you have to publish the software, and you have to publish what we call the input parameters, the commands you tell the computer to calculate from. And this won't publish them, so we don't know how they did this. If you ask them the question, why did building 7 come down? If you ask them that question, their answer will be that the answer is in my computer, and just trust me, we don't. So I'll show you these calculations, or the animations. I call them animations because everyone who is familiar with computers knows that you can make the computer do whatever that you want. I'm also quite ambitious about visualizations because we have a tendency to believe what we see. And everybody who has seen Star Wars, George Lucas, believe in flying saucers and that you can travel from one end of the universe to another with a click of a hand, and that you have beam guns and stuff like that. They don't exist. And this is kind of the same thing. So now this is actually the result from NIST calculation seen from the north side. So this is where things start down here, and it's in real time. Now the penthouse comes down, the whole internal thing collapses, and then it stops because they didn't carry it any further. This is what we see. This is the result of 8 years high computerizations from NIST.
Impressive.
And that's supposed to be real time?
Yeah.
Does it matter?
No. That should be in real time. There are many, many, many things wrong with the NIST report. It is so flawed that it's actually, some of us have told the police that it's criminal. and the police has reacted. I'll just pick out a very few aspects of the NIST report as examples. One thing is, was there at all a fire on the northeast corner on that time? Because NIST released a preliminary report in 2004, where they at that time already had done all the mapping of the fires. Very accurate work. They have written a log on each window of the building, guessing what the temperature was behind. But here, you may read this. What is important here, that around 4:45, the photograph showed that there was fires on 7, 8, 9, and 11 in the middle of the north side. Floor 12 was burned out by this time. So, at least half an hour before the building came down, there were no fires in that corner. And there are other reasons to believe that it didn't burn in that corner at all. You see, this picture I've shown you before. It is from 3 o'clock. This is the 12th floor, and column 79 is in here. But an office fire only lasts for 20 minutes. And there are still there's still 2.5 hours to go before the building collapses. They have also had problems with the temperatures, because they have looked at some of this recovered steel, both from the towers and from Building 7, and they have not found a single steel beam which has been hotter than 250 degrees. But then they say, well, maybe in that corner the temperature could have come up to 600 degrees centigrade. It's very easy to calculate how much. If you have 300 degrees, how much actually with this steel beam we're talking about expand, and it's only 2.5 centimeters. But this is not really important. I hope you all appreciate that something expands when it gets hotter, at least metals and steel. We are in Germany. But the point is that a hot steel beam does not fall down, it sags. When NIST was investigating the towers, they did make experiments. And some of the experiments were very clever, or justified at least. They built a full-scale model of a floor and put it into an oven and heated it up and expected it to fall down. It didn't. They had to stop the experiment at 800 degrees because the thermocouple actually broke. But this is the result where you can see a floor structure with fireproofing and everything. And what happens is when it starts getting hotter, it sags. It does not expand literally. I have a problem with the microphone now. But the discussion here is when you have this horizontal floor beam and it expands, would it go like this or would it start bending? And the experiment shows that it starts bending. It does not push. Actually, it pulls the joints in here. And this used this experiment for explaining the collapse of the towers, postulating that due to this sagging, the floors were pulling in the perimeter columns. So, the NIST explanation for the collapse of the towers is complete contradiction, their mechanism for the collapse of buildings. Etc., etc. There is no reason to expect a local failure in a steel structure just to spread horizontally through the building. It has never happened before, and nobody will accept it 70 years. What? Pardon? Yes, please.
It does follow the law of gravity, so it will go down, even if it expands, it will follow the law of gravity still. It will not expand.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no mechanism why it should expand, go horizontally. And also, they want us to believe that this collapse should go on within the building, and we cannot see anything on the outside while the inner building is collapsing. All the concrete in the building, all the floors were completely pulverized. Yeah, maybe, well, this is just symmetry triggering alarm. I'm sorry, this is a little mixed up. And because the symmetry is a very fundamental thing that you cannot have a completely symmetric result because of an asymmetric event. This is basically impossible. You don't see this in nature. Now, what I want to show you now is a little video of how much actually was dust, how much dust was actually formed during the collapse. And please notice that the dust comes out after and not before the building collapsed.
I told you that sucker was gonna go.
That's coming here, isn't it?
What, the cloud?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What are we doing? Jump inside?
No.
So you come up here?
No. The World Trade Center didn't make it this far. No, there's nobody down there either. They cleared the street. See, that's why they didn't try and put that fire out.
And they want us to believe that all this dust was contained within the outer wall structure actually prior to the collapse. Now, if this works, it should show the NIST collapse here, and in a little while we will compare with real life and see if we are happy. I realize that I'll go a little over time, but we've had a nice discussion on that. I think we have a problem here. NIST has a problem. I mean, if the hypothesis does not fit what you see, the scientist has a problem. And please also remember that the thing to the left here is fantasy. It's an animation. It's a computer graphics. And this one is real life. Okay? So if you allow me, please, to sum up about fires. The point is, the steel-framed high-rises, they do not collapse due to fire. They don't collapse due to earthquakes, but they don't collapse due to fires. Period. But if somebody comes one day and says, maybe it happened this particular day, maybe it happened just once for building 7 on this particular day, we must say that random small fires cannot have what we call sudden onset. You cannot have complete you cannot have free fall. There's no way. Free fall implies that all the supporting structure is eliminated at the same time. Or, no, not necessarily at the same time. But when the building starts falling, all the supporting structure has been eliminated. There is nothing supporting it. You cannot have complete symmetrical collapse and you have total collapse. It does not fit. So we have something called the scientific method in science, which maybe somebody think sounds overly academic. It is not. It is just common sense that when you are dealing with your surroundings, first you do observations and without prejudice. And then you come up with a hypothesis, trying to explain the whole collective sum of observations. And when you think you have a hypothesis, you try your hypothesis. Can it explain all the observations? And can you foresee events? Can you use your hypothesis to predict things? In this case, it would imply that you would be able to demolish steel-framed high-rises. If you just started a fire in some office, it would be a very cheap and very nice way of taking buildings down. But it doesn't happen. So if the hypothesis does not stand the testing, you have to come up with a new hypothesis. And I think if you are happy with the NIST explanation, you can take the rest of the day off in the wonderful weather. If you want to hear another hypothesis, please stay for a little intermission and I'll be back. Thank you.